Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we have a new Modmats. We're really excited to talk about those. We have a new large Modmat that is in our anti-static Modmat line. We're calling it the Volt. We'll be talking about that today. There's also news on a new AMD GPU chiplet patent. Chiplet designs for GPUs have been in talks for years at this point. NVIDIA put out an MCM white paper many years ago talking about it, but there's finally some progression towards an eventual chiplet approach for GPUs. Also, GPUs getting smuggled into Hong Kong via fishing boat, because that's where we are now with shortages. It was specifically a mining line of GPUs from NVIDIA's new CMP line. We talk about a potential AMD Zen 3 side channel exploit, and a couple of other industry news and hardware release topics for the past week. Before that, this video is brought to you by ASUS and the ASUS TUF Gaming B550 Plus Wi-Fi motherboard, ready for AMD Ryzen CPUs. The TUF Gaming B550 board comes in ATX and Micro ATX variants, with key features including a Wi-Fi 6 module, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, a fanless chipset heatsink for quiet operation, and a focus on stability and uptime. Learn more about the TUF Gaming B550 Plus Wi-Fi motherboard at the link in the description below. So first up, we have some really big news that I'd like to spend a few minutes on. Hopefully that's okay. We've spent the last year working on advancing our Modmat manufacturing process and doing new designs and testing and quality assurance, just sampling back and forth for the past year or so for this new design. So this is called the GamersNexus Large Modmat Volt. We have the original large Modmat still for sale in the store. It's just been restocked. And the medium original Modmats are on the store as well. So all three will be available at the same time. We're not discontinuing any of them. They'll exist simultaneously. And many of you probably know that we've been out of stock for Modmats for about 4 months now. This was an active decision by us. We didn't even do back orders this time because we knew we had a new one coming out. So we wanted to just put them all back up at the same time. That way everyone could get the specific one that they wanted. We've done a lot of cool testing for the Modmat Volt, and it applies backwards to the others as well. For example, we did a bunch of destructive testing where we broke apart our own components that we're selling to really dissect them, and quality assurance testing we've already blown through about half of the inventory of the new large Modmat Volt. We still have a lot of inventory of the original large Modmat. It's the same high quality materials and technical processes as the new Volt. And then the medium Modmat, we have a decent amount of inventory as well, although it's been selling fast. But so far, if you want the Volt, and you see this around when it goes up, you should probably buy it because it will sell through pretty quickly. We bought a huge amount of inventory. It's stupid the amount we bought compared to previously, because we had to literally knock down walls in our distributor's warehouse in order to accommodate the shipment of Modmats. So it was a lot of inventory, but we're through about half of it. Of course, they'll go up on back order as soon as they sell through again. So a couple behind the scenes notes on the Modmat. I'll give you the background of it first. If you missed the announcement video, there is a brief announcement video on the channel that goes through all the details on it. But the Modmat is a PC building surface, an anti-static work surface that we introduced in 2017. This is our first revision of the large Modmat, where we've introduced a lot of new elements. So it has 2 snaps now to accommodate left-handed users, but also just so that you don't drag the cable across the screws wherever you're tracking them on the left or the right side of the pad. There's this grid of 4, I didn't explain in the announcement video, but this grid of 4 squares over on the left side was Andrew's idea for just sort of generic or miscellaneous screw tracking or component tracking. Put the stuff in the tray, and then you can write down 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever on a piece of paper so that you remember which one goes to which area of the thing that you're taking apart. We now have an Ethernet wiring diagram in the bottom left that's got 568A and 568B. If you build your own Ethernet cables, but not commonly enough to memorize it. We have the power pinouts for Molex, fans, PCIe, and CPU EPS 12 volt power. There's actually a 2-scale memory pinout in the top left for DDR1 through 4. And we also have some quick reference material for inductors, MOSFETs, things of that nature. And the reason we put that one on there specifically is because last year when we were designing this has been, by the way, in development for about a year, maybe a little more at this point. But when we were designing this last year, I happened to be working on some water blocks at the time, and I noticed that one of them, in particular, the instructions said to apply the 1mm thermal pad to the inductors and to apply the 2mm thermal pad to the MOSFETs. But it never explained what those were. That's not a problem for us, but just kind of got me thinking, there's a lot of people who are going to install water block for the first time, not know which is which, and sure, you can look it up. It's not a huge inconvenience, but to have it right there helps. And also, frankly, a lot of people probably won't look it up. They're going to take a guess. And if it's wrong, that will matter quite a bit on a water block where you're talking about a 1 versus 2 millimeter thickness. So we put those on there as reference materials just to continue sort of the educational approach of our products and the functional approach of them, which we want to make stuff that's actually useful every day and high quality and will last a long time. So that's what this is. We have some other cool stuff on here too. There's electrical symbols in the top right. The grid has been expanded to have 2 GPUs on them. So this is less if you're buying a new GPU and more of if you're maintaining one right now. But if you're maintaining a card, it makes it easier to track the backside versus the top side PCB screws so that you don't have extras when you rebuild it. But the behind the scenes stuff, the Modmats are the most expensive product we make by a long shot. And basically last year when we placed the order, the logistics are really slow right now globally, and manufacturing's all backed up because the factories also make stuff like PPE, for example. So we're low on their priority list because of that. But when we placed the order, we basically blew out the bank account to get the order in because I need to pay for them before I get them. And then we have to sell them to get the money back to order more of them. So that's the cycle we've been in for years now. But in spite of the rising materials and logistics costs, we actually haven't increased the price, the MSRP of the product. So the large Modmat Volt, the new one that was described in the announcement video, is the same price as the original and the same price that it's been for 4 years, despite those increasing costs for us over time. We're really happy with it. The print quality is super vibrant, really crisp design. There's a lot of functional stuff on here, and it's the densest print we've ever done in terms of information per square area. So we think you'll like it too. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you want to buy one. And thank you to everyone who has purchased one over the last 4 years, because those purchases and the ones that are coming in over the last couple days for this, which have been absolutely amazing. I really honestly didn't think we would move through all the inventory this fast, but this happens every time, and it's just a matter of accumulating more money from the sales to order more to satisfy the demand. But all that support from all of you from the last 4 years who've bought them is the reason we've been able to expand the team to, for example, that MDXT H1 fire hazard testing that was all done by Patrick Stone, and that salary is basically paid for by Modmats. So, and then things like the test equipment purchases where we've bought pressure testers that are really expensive. We've purchased dummy heaters. We've purchased surface flatness testers, and we're working on a thermal chamber as one of our next major purchases. Those are probably in the 10 to 20 grand range, depending on the level of climate control. So that's all made possible by basically the Modmats and the last 4 years of sales of Modmats, toolkits, mouse mats. So thank you to everyone who's bought one, and you can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to pick one up. Okay, let's move on to the first story. First up in the news, AMD this past week published a new white paper on its website detailing some potential security vulnerabilities regarding predictive store forwarding, or PSF, which is a feature on Zen 3 CPUs and is something you can toggle off as well. PSF works by attempting to predict the dependency between a load and a store, and then it speculatively executes instructions based on that prediction. It's similar to some of the other CPU technologies that attempt to speed up execution. We've seen this with speculative execution and branch prediction in the past. Quote, in typical code, PSF provides a performance benefit by speculating on the load result and allowing later instructions to begin execution sooner than they otherwise would be able to. Most of the time, the PSF prediction is accurate. However, there are cases where the prediction may not be accurate and cause incorrect CPU speculation, says AMD in its white paper. In the case of that inaccurate speculation that AMD is describing, the CPU is supposed to flush the incorrect results from the CPU pipeline. AMD illustrates a couple of different ways in which inaccurate predictions can occur, as well as detailing some limitations regarding speculation on Zen 3 CPUs. AMD then goes on to outline what it believes are the primary security concerns. Quote, because PSF speculation is limited to the current program context, the impact of bad PSF speculation is similar to that of speculative store bypass. And they list Spectre version 4 as an example of this. In both cases, security concerns arise if code exists that implements some kind of security control, which can be bypassed when CPUs speculate incorrectly. This may occur if a program, such as a web browser, hosts a piece of untrusted code, and the untrusted code is able to influence how the CPU speculates in other regions in a way that results in data leakage. This is similar, AMD says, to the security risk with other Spectre-type attacks. Furthermore, AMD warns that software that uses isolation or sandboxing might be vulnerable here. All told, AMD believes that the amount of code that might actually be vulnerable to PSF's security implications is low, though AMD does suggest disabling the feature if users are concerned or have a specific concern related to their use case. While it was thought that disabling PSF would carry a significant performance hit, early testing done by Phoronix finds that any performance penalty seems to be negligible. In most cases, Phoronix found that workloads showed no more than a 1 to 2% performance difference with the PSF feature disabled. Additionally, AMD has also made patches available to the Linux kernel that allow PSF to be disabled. For the time being, it seems this issue isn't as big of a concern as some of the early x86 speculative execution vulnerabilities that we've covered in the past, and that's a good thing. Up next, the GTX 1080 Ti is dead. Well, it's been dead for quite a while now. It hasn't been made for at least one full generation at this point. But there were rumors over this past week that got a lot of people excited for a 1080 Ti revival, because specifically relating to an EVGA, I think it was 1080 Ti FTW3, there was a story that the model sold carried a newer serial number. Not a whole lot of detail to that, but pretty easy to vet the story. So we called EVGA and we asked EVGA, is it true? Is it true that one of the best GPUs NVIDIA ever made, and a mistake that NVIDIA will probably not make again in terms of selling something at such a good price for the performance, is it true that this thing's coming back? Officially, EVGA's answer was, quote, the official answer is no, it is not being remade. The 1080 Ti is no longer in production. Now, unofficially, when we asked EVGA's representative, is the 1080 Ti getting remade, the answer was, haha, no. So, a little bit hurtful to those of us who might have wanted to see a 1080 Ti come back, but it is not coming back. Sorry to shoot that one down, but you can mark that rumor for the past week as false. Up next, an interesting turn of fate for the work that customs agents do. So TVB News in Hong Kong has reported that Hong Kong Customs seized an illegal shipment of a number of things, among those, though, GPUs. We're at that point. At the point now where smuggling operations are smuggling video cards and actually RAM in here as well. Phones are not particularly new to be smuggled, but those were also in the batch. So in this shipment of items that Hong Kong Customs and Excise Department seized, there was a cache of 300 unidentified video cards, not a specific model or brand name attached to them, at least right now. There was some footage of the items that were seized in TVB News' report, and we'll show some of that as we go through this story. But it's mostly video cards that look to be lacking any sort of display outputs. So we thought we spotted a couple in the top row that might have display outs, but for those that are lacking display out, that might be something in the NVIDIA CMP-HX line or some other mining line of GPUs where a display out is simply not needed and is often stripped to reduce the resale value of the mining GPU. The smuggling run included other technology products, with TVB primarily showing cell phones, video cards, and trays upon trays of RAM. We'd be open to shipping the Hong Kong Customs Department one of our new Modmats so that they can identify if it's DDR4 or DDR3. Hong Kong Customs said that the phones, the RAM, and the GPUs altogether were worth approximately 2 million HKD, or just over 257,000 US dollars. All of the items were found on a fishing boat, or a speedboat as we understand it. We're assuming were destined for ports in mainland China or in Shenzhen, and other illegal items included shark fins and other endangered sea life. But the technology products got the bulk of the coverage. We saw also that last month, serial leaker at momomo_US on Twitter spotted a Palit CMP 30HX GPU, one of NVIDIA's new mining GPUs, for sale for about 724 USD. So it gives you some sense of, as if the audience doesn't already know, but gives you some sense of the true value of scalping. The fact, though, that it's gotten, GPUs have found their ways into smuggling operations is surreal in the bizarrest sense. Not really something that we've ever seen in our specific niche of the industry. Again, it's happened with phones, but this is kind of a new thing for GPUs. So either way, that's been seized, and presumably the Hong Kong Customs Department will do something with the cards. Maybe they'll set up a mining operation, who knows? Alternatively, they could start competing with Linus and do a verified actual gamer program to relinquish those cards back into the market. Next up, an AMD patent. So AMD is expanding on its patent that it filed back in January for a chiplet approach to GPUs. This has been something that's been discussed for a number of years now, where probably about 5 or 6 years ago, NVIDIA was talking about the introduction of multi-chip modules as an approach for GPU manufacturing. AMD, of course, talking about chiplets, taking terminology from its Ryzen advancements in architecture. And this is something where moving away to the extent possible from large monolithic silicon is a more sustainable approach to manufacturing because it's a lot cheaper to make smaller dies and the yields increase, which also helps with the cost and cost control. It's not always possible depending on what they're working on, what the chip is going to be used for, but multi-chip modules or chiplet approaches will become more common, including in GPUs as we move forward. In the context of the patent filing, the new AMD patent expands on a previous patent that AMD filed regarding GPU chiplets, and one of the key differences is an active bridge versus a passive bridge. In the patent, the bridge is the means in which the GPU chiplets are interconnected and coupled to resources, such as L3 or another form of cache. AMD's first GPU chiplet patent called for a passive bridge to connect to the GPU chiplets, and that was back in January. Back then, AMD described it like this, quote, "The GPU chiplet array includes the first GPU chiplet communicably coupled to the CPU via a bus and a second GPU chiplet communicably coupled to the first GPU chiplet via a passive crosslink. The passive crosslink is a passive interposer die dedicated for inter-chiplet communications and partitions system-on-chip or SoC functionality into smaller functional chiplet groupings." In some way, if you visualize this sort of as the Infinity Fabric language that AMD uses right now, it starts to make a bit more sense. It's really not too hard to follow once you break down the language to the base elements, which is that multiple chiplets will be connected to each other, and then one chiplet somewhere will speak to whatever it needs to speak to, in this case, the CPU at some level. AMD has refined its approach with the second patent. In AMD's first patent, again, it talks about a passive interposer-based bridge, whereas now it's proposing an active silicon-based bridge. The actual pull quote from the document doesn't change too much from the original filing, but there's one key difference, and it's where AMD talks about coupling the GPU chiplet to the CPU via a bus. And here's the change. It says a second GPU chiplet communicably coupled to the first GPU chiplet via an active bridge chiplet. The active bridge chiplet is an active silicon die that bridges GPU chiplets and allows partitioning of systems on chip or SoC functionality into smaller functional chiplet groupings. Other aspects remain the same, such as connecting all chiplets to an L3 cache that is cache coherent and unified across all GPU chiplets. It seems that the L3 cache is actually located on the active bridge itself, from what we understand right now, and seemingly functions similar to that of AMD's Infinity Cache. AMD's patents mention a communications bus, and that's likely some iteration of AMD's existing interconnects. Another key aspect is how the active bridge approach would mimic a monolithic GPU die, which would have certain benefits from a developer or a programmer standpoint. Quote, "Accordingly, as discussed herein, an active bridge chiplet deploys monolithic GPU functionality using a set of interconnected GPU chiplets in a manner that makes the GPU chiplet implementation appear as a traditional monolithic GPU from a programmer, model, or developer perspective." In other words, you wouldn't really have to change how you do things as a programmer, and that's important to make sure there's adoption. Further quoted from AMD, the scalable data fabric of one GPU chiplet is able to access the lower level cache on the active bridge chiplet in nearly the same time as to access the lower level cache on its same chiplet, and thus allows GPU chiplets to maintain cache coherency without requiring additional inter-chiplet coherency protocols. This low latency inter-chiplet cache coherency in turn enables the chiplet-based system to operate as a monolithic GPU from, again, the software perspective. Now, this whole section of that filing is more or less saying that you're not going to have to do special things as a programmer in order to leverage the GPU, so it can be interfaced with via code in the same ways mostly that would be used currently with a monolithic GPU. And again, that's really important to make sure any of this stuff actually goes anywhere, because if you don't have software side support, unless there's a massive market takeover, then it just sort of sits there and spins its wheels. So that's where AMD is with the patents. Also in AMD news, we've more or less just confirmed the AMD X570 passive chipset rumors that were going around this week. Not really a big thing. This is, from what we understand, been a slow and silent rollout from AMD. But the X570 chipset has a new piece of silicon, physically different silicon from what we understand right now, not just a firmware update, that allows the X570 chipset to run passively without any form of active cooling. And this is something that was at least this week, spotted in some of the EEC filings by Gigabyte for X570S motherboards. The suffix there, that S, isn't necessarily AMD's naming. Gigabyte is a big fan of tagging letters onto chipsets to just demonstrate that it's a refresh. That might be what this is. Either way, though, it does, from what we've heard from board partners, sound like there are two versions of the X570 chipset, and one of them is the passive one. Some of the discussion was getting a little carried away and started talking about Zen 3 refreshes. We're not really sure about the legitimacy of those rumors right now. We weren't able to dig anything up to validate them. So for now, we'll mark that as maybe a bit of a stretch, and otherwise we'll keep an eye out for additional changes. Up next, Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger and the US government talking about chip shortages. So there's a continued semiconductor shortage that's been gaining an increasing amount of attention from governments around the world, the US government included for this week's story. Previously, the White House signed an executive order meant to address the silicon shortage by proposing a review of the supply chain for key semiconductors. The executive order was preceded by a letter penned by multiple silicon designers, including Intel, NVIDIA, and AMD, among others, all calling for an expansion to US-based semiconductor manufacturing. Additionally, the White House recently called for a $50 billion fund to bolster the semiconductor industry, with funds earmarked for manufacturing incentives, research and design, as well as creating a new National Semiconductor Technology Center. Of course, for semiconductor manufacturers to use any of their record profits to build their own fabrication facilities is unheard of, and we wouldn't want to take our profits and build fabs with them. So this is the direction that it looks like things are going right now. On April 12th, the US government will be hosting a summit specifically to talk about the global semiconductor shortage. In the past couple of weeks, we reported on the EU having its own talks about bringing some more fabrication facilities online in Europe. And this April 12th discussion will feature Samsung, General Motors, and Global Foundries, actually, alongside Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who recently took over for Intel and has been making some changes that, for Intel, look like they are going in the right direction. In addition to the automakers and the chip manufacturers, the U.S. government will have some people present. So National Security Advisor and National Economic Council directors will be present and will be discussing the shortage and how it's impacted the multiple industries that are attached to them. Semiconductor manufacturing at this point has become an interesting political football, certainly not something we were really expecting to see from our point of view in the industry, but nonetheless, it's important at this point, and there aren't that many companies that are capable of manufacturing semiconductors, at least not ones that are truly leading in technology. We mostly have two manufacturers in the space. There's TSMC, which is nearly the market cap of Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA combined at this point. And there's Samsung. Of course, there are others like SK Hynix or Micron, but those aren't nearly as big as TSMC or Samsung in this capacity. Increasing capacity at foundries, or the ability to produce more silicon wafers or chips, is measured in months to years, not in days or weeks. There's no quick way to flip a switch and bring more fabs online. And there's no amount of sitting around a table that's going to speed up the process. So to provide a bit of realism here, although it's good news that governments are interested in silicon manufacturing and stabilizing the supply chain, we don't want people to think that there's going to be any immediate uptick in the supply or availability of components as a result of government interest. It will take a very long time for any of the changes that are being made right now to materialize. Again, talking months to years, months at best, depending on if the changes are in existing fabs as opposed to constructing wholly new ones. Up next, Epic Games and the loot box settlement deadlines. So not long ago, Epic Games settled its class action lawsuit regarding randomized loot boxes, but there's some deadlines looming if you want to either opt out or claim rewards for this, which is why we're bringing it up now. It was a $26.5 million settlement that'll see Epic Games hand out tens of millions of dollars worth of in-game credits for each of the affected games. For Fortnite, that'd be V-Bucks, or for Rocket League, it'd be Rocket League credits. In fact, Epic started depositing these credits to accounts not long after the settlement was approved. The $26.5 million set aside to settle claims for additional compensation was also up for discussion in recent coverage. So for valid claims, Epic will be paying out an additional $50 in cash, or up to 13,500 V-Bucks or 13,000 Rocket League credits. While this news is a few weeks old at this point, we bring it up because, again, several deadlines are looming. April 12th, 2021 marks the deadline to object or exclude yourself from the settlement altogether. April 26th is the current deadline to file a claim, while the final approval and the hearing takes place on May 6th, 2021. AMD's RX 6800 XT Midnight Black Edition GPU in the news as well. So this was a special, what AMD called Midnight Black version of its RX 6800 XT reference video card. The special edition is relatively unnoteworthy, sans the fact that it took 0 seconds to both appear on the internet and disappear. The card is mostly all black, as the AMD standard RX 6800 XT, removing some of the silver elements that were mixed in originally. And according to AMD, it was created in response to community feedback and popular demand. The card was also released as first dibs for AMD's Red Team community members, as those members received advance notice of the card's arrival. Quote, based on community feedback and popular demand, we've created a select quantity of AMD Radeon RX 6800 XT Midnight Black graphics cards featuring the same performance as the widely popular RX 6800 XT. This is an exclusive advance notice to members of Red Team community, and this offer has limited availability. And we're not sure yet if AMD is planning to do another run of these, but certainly it was popular enough where they might be incentivized too. And finally, Intel accidentally uses a competitor's product in one of its advertisements. Can't get a break at Intel. Intel's marketing team is out in force promoting what they're calling the world's best processor on a thin and light notebook. If you have spent any amount of time with ads enabled, banner ads enabled on websites, you've probably seen some Intel ads at this point, especially common on Facebook right now, where Intel is getting aggressive, targeting Apple and its M1 computers in a fashion which is starting to look a little bit defensive from Intel, since they're so specifically targeting the new Apple components. So the latest advertisement from Intel is talking about its Tiger Lake i7 1185G7. However, there is a problem other than the name, and it's that they're showing a MacBook Pro, not the processor, whose name shan't be named again. To be fair, MacBooks have used Intel's chips in the past, sure, but Apple also famously ditched Intel for its own line of ARM-based Apple Silicon M-series processors last year. That said, there's no way the MacBook Pro in the picture is using one of Intel's latest x86 mobile chips. Intel is using a stock image from Getty Images, and while we could probably have an entirely different discussion on $250 billion companies using stock images, there is another problem aside from that, which is, again, that the machine in the photo is a Mac. So if you give it more than a cursory glance, you'll notice a few things, like the touch bar and the magic mouse. Furthermore, visiting Getty Images shows the same, quote, millennial man playing computer game on laptop at home, end quote, at several different angles, and further confirms the MacBook Pro. This blunder probably wouldn't be as funny had Intel not recently gone on its anti-Mac and anti-M1 campaign, as well as using its own questionable first-party benchmarks to try and cast the M1 in a less than favorable light. But nonetheless, seeing millennial man playing computer game on laptop at home has certainly sold us on wanting one of these laptops. And that's it for hardware news this week. Thanks for watching. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to pick up one of our 3 Modmat options that are now available, or patreon.com/gamersnexus for some behind-the-scenes videos. And check back next week for hardware news or other videos this week when we talk about millennial man stabbing motherboard with screwdriver, or other Getty Images stock photos that are available for Intel to use in its next advertising campaign. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.